amazing thing about this aircraft is we often contrast the length of service for a lot of the aircraft displaying here at RIAT when we compare them to the F-16 and the F-18 that have been in service or certainly been flying for the last 40-45 years. But this aircraft first flew in 1956, which amazingly was 2 years after the prototype English Electric Lightning and 2 years before the Phantom. That's an amazing 63 years ago.
Configurations. They settled on the Delta wing, and the first series production Mig-21s, as Mark said, took to the air in 1956, and the aircraft was given the NATO codename Fishbed.
Delta wing, very, very reminiscent of the early English Electric Lightning there. The tailplane very identical, that kind of 45-degree sweep. The nose cone surrounded by the air intake of the engine, looking very, very similar to the Lightning of the same era.
Is the shock cone of its nose?
Yes.
Mig-21 entered Soviet state testing in April 1959, and it then started to go into service in large numbers.
And what a hugely successful design, with around about 11,000 aircraft produced, and to contrast that with probably the aircraft that in Western terms got closest to that, 5,200 only of Phantom F4s produced over its 20-year period. 60 nations flew this aircraft, and again comparing that with the Phantom, only a dozen flew the F4. Yes, Mig-21s flew across the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet sphere of influence, built under license in Czechoslovakia, in India, and in various versions in China. Determining affordability of an aircraft. However, in 1974, a Mig-21 would cost you $2 million. When you compare that against the $8 million that an F4 Phantom was costing at the time. So for the non-Soviet nations that actually had a choice of which aircraft they could operate, you can see why this was such a prolific type of fighter.
But as Mikoyan made efforts to increase the Mig-21's short, sort of close-in visual dogfights, against US Air Force aircraft in North Vietnamese hands, and in the India-Pakistan conflict of 1971, Indian MiG-21s claimed 8 aerial kills, 4 of them against another of this aircraft's Western contemporaries, the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter. Of course, it's somewhat outclassed nowadays, even in upgraded form, but it's still been used in far more recent conflicts. MiG-21s have been active in both the Syrian and Libyan civil wars, and in fact examples have been shot down in both. Romania has operated MiG-21s since 1962, when it received its first MiG-21 F-13 models. Its last new deliveries were in 1982, and it was 10 years after that that a huge upgrade started. Standards. It was known as LanceR, with a capital R at the end for Romania. The work was performed by Elbit in Israel in cooperation with Romanian company Aerostar, and the first upgraded aircraft flew in August 1995, and a huge number of changes were embodied in the LanceR. They were fitted with head-up displays, colour multi-function displays in the cockpit, a new radar warning receiver, NATO-compatible transponders enabling the aircraft to operate safely in Western air traffic environments, helmet-mounted displays, radar navigation system, and far more. The sort of kit generally found in much more modern aeroplanes.
Very similar to the specification of many of the midlife updates for the F-16s.
Romania's Mig-21s are also compatible with both Russian and Western weapons. There were originally 3 versions: LanceR A for air-to-ground, LanceR B, the 2-seat trainer, air-to-ground role transferred to these C models. 2 squadrons of these aircraft still operational in the Romanian Air Force. This one is from Escadrilla 861 at Mihail Kogalnicianu on the southeastern Black Sea coast. And there's also Escadrilla 711 at Campia Turci in the northwest. Romania, looking to the future of its combat aircraft capability, introduced its first F-16s, ex-Portuguese Air Force aircraft, in 2016, and they're looking to buy 36 more of them, which will spell the end for the last of these Mig-21s, which have been aligned as part of NATO since 2004. Who would have expected that just 20 or so years earlier? They take part regularly in multinational exercises, and they can still play a useful air combat role, these aircraft. They're small, so they're a difficult target to acquire. And of course, they're very fast. That enables them to make run attacks against more modern fighters, though their range is still a bit of an issue.
Yeah, I think the most difficult thing to deal with in fighting this aircraft is the size of it. It's very, very small. If you can't see it, then you can't fight it once you're into the visual fight. An incredible rate of roll as well there, and supersonic. I think, although it's very much a 3rd generation fighter, it's still very, very credible in the 5th generation world. A few years later, of course, quite a lot of the rest of Romania's Air Force fleet now westernized, and we've got Delta Wing fighter aircraft, very high landing speed, in excess of 150 knots.
Well, I very much hope you enjoyed that, and we've got plenty more to look forward to on the flying programme today. Next up, we've got the landing of the Royal Air Force aerobatic team of Red Arrows, who have split from the 747 obviously and are returning here. They'll be displaying later on in the afternoon, and after that we've got the Blades making their RIAT debut with their 4. Fortunately, it's gone unserviceable, so that is not going to be on the programme today. But then we'll be moving on with the Royal Air Force Tucano, followed by the launch for the NATO 70 flypast, the Italian Air Force T-346A. Weather permitting, the Royal Air Force Battle of Britain Memorial flight is just after 10 to 2. Then the NATO flypast itself at 2:15. The Royal Air Force Typhoon solo follows that, and then the recoveries of the fast jets from the NATO flypast were 2:45. They're followed by the recovery of the NATO E-3A Sentry from the NATO flypast. At 3:30, we've got the Army Air Corps attack helicopter display team with the Apache AH-1, a pyrotechnic display. 4 o'clock, the Spanish Navy pair of EAV-8B Harriers, another of the stars of the show, and another one to follow that at 2:15 for the Royal Air Force Red Arrows with their own display routine. That's followed by the F-35B Lightning appearing in the overhead just after 10:05. Then Airbus Defence and Space with the A400M display. The Finnish Air Force FA-18C Hornet at 5:15.
Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, as we have some strong winds on the site.